You know that sound, that iconic, industrial, just crushing guitar tone of Rammstein. It's not just, heavy. It's something else. It's brutally precise, like a monolithic wall of sound that feels less like an instrument and more like some kind of heavy machinery.
So that's the big question, right? How in the world do you actually engineer a sound that's somehow both a roaring wall of fire and a perfectly synchronized, cold, hard machine? It's a total paradox. So let's fire up the forge and deconstruct this beast.
All right, so we're going to break this down just like studio engineers would. Think of this as our blueprint. We're going to follow the signal chain right from the very start. The engine, which is where the signal is born. Then we'll move to the forge, where it gets all that aggression shaped into it. After that, it's the assembly line in the studio. And finally, we'll look at the operator, the human element that has to control it all. Okay, let's dive in. We're starting right at the source, the engine. The whole journey of this sound begins before the signal even leaves the guitar, with a really specific piece of tech that's bolted right into the wood. Okay, so what's wild here is the sheer difference in power. Rammstein's sound is all about active pickups, specifically the EMG 81. And just look at the output numbers, 1.25 volts, compared to a vintage pickup's 0.3. That's not just a little louder, it's a whole different animal. It's a cleaner, way more potent signal, and it's all powered by a little 9-volt battery. What this does is it just slams the front of the amplifier with a pure, high-output signal, and that is absolutely critical for getting that tight distortion without all the flabby, low-end mud. You know that mud. It's what happens when a weaker, passive signal makes the amp work way too hard on frequencies you're just going to end up cutting later anyway. The EMG, it basically cleans house right from the start. And a huge part of how it gets that clarity is a built-in high-pass filter. The easiest way to think about it is like a bouncer at a club. It only lets the punchy, articulate high frequencies in, while telling all those rumbly, muddy low frequencies, nope, sorry, you're not on the list.
And here's the crucial number, 241 Hertz. The EMG 81 has that high-pass filter built right into its circuit, and it's set right there. I mean, this is surgical. It just carves out all that unnecessary low-end mud before it can even get to the amplifier. And that right there, that's one of the first big secrets to that tight, percussive, industrial sound. The problem of low-end flab, it's solved at the source. So, now we've got the super clean, high-output signal. What do we do with it? Well, we feed it into the forge, the amplifier that basically defined an entire era of heavy music.
And there it is, the Mesa Boogie Dual Rectifier. Look, in the 90s, if you wanted that industrial crunch, this thing wasn't just an option. It was pretty much the only option. Its whole character is just aggression, which makes it the perfect forge for that Rammstein tone.
But how do you actually dial it in? Well, there's a very specific formula. First up, you're going to use the modern mode. That's for that crushing, lightning-fast attack. Second, you switch the rectifier to silicon diodes. That keeps the power high and the low end super tight. Third, the classic EQ scoop. You cut the mids to let the bass and treble just dominate everything. And finally, you crank up the presence control to add that top-end cut and really open the whole amp up.
So, if you're actually in the studio, where would you even start? Well, this gives us a fantastic baseline. Now notice the gain. It's high, around 7, but it's not dimed out at 10. That's a huge secret right there. It's not just about overwhelming distortion. And then look at the mids, dialed way back to 4. This creates that signature sonic space, and that space is absolutely critical. It carves out a perfect pocket in the mix for Till Lindemann's vocals and all those massive bass and synth lines to sit, so the whole track doesn't just turn into a chaotic mess.
Okay, but here's where things get really interesting. The gear, that's only part of the story. The real wall of sound, it isn't built in the amp. It's built in the studio, during assembly. This is where the machine is truly constructed.
And hey, this isn't just me speculating. Academic analysis of their production actually points to this as, and I'm quoting here, quote, one of the secrets of Rammstein's guitar sound. So, let's take a look at that production blueprint.
And here it is. This is the anatomy of the wall. You see, each guitarist, Richard Kruspe and Paul Landers, they don't just record one track. Nope. They each record their part through 2 different amps, their signature analog Mesa rectifier and a digital Sansamp modeler. But it doesn't stop there. Then each of those 4 tracks is doubled. We're talking a grand total of 8 layers of guitar all playing the exact same riff.
So why does this work so well? Well, actually comes down to physics. The analog signal from the Mesa rectifier is just a tiny bit slower to react than the purely digital signal from the Sansamp. So when you blend them together, you get this incredible effect where the entire frequency spectrum, from the slower bass to the faster treble, it all hits your ear at the exact same moment. It just creates this unbelievably powerful and cohesive sonic impact.
But think about it. With 8 tracks of super high-gain guitars all layered up, you don't just have sound. You have an ocean of hiss and electrical noise. It's chaos. So how do you control it? The answer is a brutally simple but incredibly important tool, the noise gate.
And this right here is absolutely central to that industrial feel. The noise gate literally slams shut in the spaces between the notes, creating absolute brutal silence. This is what makes the riff so percussive and machine-like. It's not an exaggeration to say the silence is just as important as the sound.
Okay, so we've got the engine, we've got the forge, we've got the assembly line. But there's one final, crucial component that brings it all together. It's time to talk about the operator, the human player who's tasked with actually controlling this machine.
You know, I absolutely love this quote from Rammstein's Richard Kruspe. He's talking about Malcolm Young from AC/DC, of all people, and he says, "That guy's right hand was unbelievable. It's very important to have that rhythm in your right hand." And just like that, our focus shifts completely away from the gear and onto the human technique.
So the entire philosophy here is all about control. It's precision over raw power. The performance itself has to be as consistent and machine-like as you can possibly get. In the studio, the riffs are often quantized, which basically means they're edited to be perfectly, mathematically on the beat. It's like snapping every single note to a perfect rid. You combine that with an incredibly tight palm muting technique, where you rest the edge of your palm on the strings right at the bridge to get that percussive chug sound, and you start to realize the final component in creating the machine is the human player having to act like a machine.
Which brings us to this final thought. We tend to think of heavy music as being about maximum gain, maximum volume, just maximum everything. But after deconstructing this entire sound, you have to ask yourself, is the ultimate heavy tone actually built from maximum gain, or is it really built from maximum control?